Hello. Today in my storytelling playlist, I'm going to discuss my creative life. So I'm going to give you a few anecdotes about sort of background on how I became creative or how I changed over time. So I'm going to start with this. My parents are divorced, and when I was a child, I lived at my mother's house during the week, most weeks, and then I would go to my father's house on the weekends. Well, my father worked at a window factory as a manager, and many times he'd have to work on Saturdays and sometimes even Sundays. So I would go with him to work, and there was this conference room that had like a TV and stuff, and I got to sort of sit there while he was at work. And sometimes I'd watch cartoons or whatever, or play with my toys. Sometimes he would give me little tasks like sorting screws, and I would get some money for those. It's a way to build my character, I guess. But one of the things that I learned how to do during that time was draw, and specifically I would make these sort of side maps, cross sections of like castles or caves or some kind of structure, or even land sometimes, underground tunnels and things. And I would place these like figures or tanks in there, and I would end up in my imagination create these sort of scenarios of someone kind of fighting through these structures. So I'd like draw a stick figure and then erase them and move them somewhere else, and he'd like shoot and things like that. But what it made me realize is that during that time I started going more and more into my own head, and because I was alone there often for long stretches of time, I could go very deeply in there. And I think that several years of me, like at my mom's house, I would be social with the kids in my neighborhood, so I had that sort of social side to me. But then at my dad's house, I was usually alone, or with my sister sometimes, but mostly alone. And I would just lose sort of myself inside my head. Eventually I would play Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, which were also very internal. So I'll probably do a video on Dungeons and Dragons in this playlist at some point. I'm a big fan, and I've been a lifelong fan. But I'll get to that in a different video. After that experience, moving on into my early teenage years, my grandmother passed away, and my grandfather used to work at a department store, and they closed like a section of the store, and so he was able to get many of the art supplies and creative supplies from the store for very cheap, if not free. And my grandmother was a very creative person. If you ever went to her house, she had jars all over the place. She made many, many things, cooked, pickled, had a huge garden. So she was very into creating things. So she got this stuff from him, and then eventually she passed away, and he thought that I should have it. Because of all the children in our family, I was the one that was most sort of into creative things. So I got this stuff, and what it allowed me to do is experiment in a way that someone my age would not be normally allowed to do. Oil paints are quite expensive, and suddenly I had a couple boxes of oil paints at my disposal. So this gave me the freedom to kind of mess up a lot and just experiment and learn how to paint by myself mostly. I mean, I watched some shows on TV like Bob Ross and things like that, but mainly it was me just doing trial and error. And if I didn't have those things, I don't think I would have been able to do that. So my drawing skills and my painting skills improved a lot over the next few years just doing that. And, I like to think that some of my grandmother kind of was channeled through that as well. So I had this sort of painting phase, which went on for about 10 years, I guess. And then I was living in Detroit, and I didn't really have a lot of money, so I didn't have any more paints. And I started doing collages because it's all the only thing I had money for. And I ended up creating these collages that were like almost like psychic vomit, for lack of a better word. And I detail them a lot in some of my work, but they were like the seed of, I would say, my adult creative life. And, the thing about collage is that there's all these symbols, and the symbols are so archetypal, and depending on how you juxtapose the symbols, you can create a lot of meaning, and in some ways, I think more than in a painting. And then there's also like the magical aspect of it. And I have some of my videos I talk about synchronicity and the cut-ups, the Brian Geisen, William Burroughs cut-ups, and how you can use those to create magical effects. And I think a lot of the collages I made during this time were channeling things that were happening in my life and almost in some ways foretelling the future, and just weird stuff, but very profound, at least to me. And that changed my life. And I ended up going to school for bookmaking, and I ended up really focusing mostly on collage for my visual art. I still painted watercolor and stuff from time to time, but I found the immediacy of collage kind of intoxicating. So I ended up really focusing on that for my illustrations for my thesis project. And that's where I really found my voice with it, I think. And over the last 20 years, I've been doing that, publishing books, and some of them are illustrated, and I usually include my digital collages or paper collages inside of them. But the thing is, with the collages, they also informed my writing, which kind of started in tandem with the collages, but as I got older and older, the writing became a bigger and bigger part until now I'm mostly write, and I do some collage, and some drawing and a little bit of painting, but mostly I write now. But the great thing about the collages is they can inform what I'm writing about and sometimes get me out of jams. When somebody has writer's block, like I already hardly ever have writer's block, and one of the reasons I don't is because when I get to that place, I use different techniques to try to pull me out, to take me out of my rational mind and go into my irrational mind. And then, like for example, let's say I'm writing a story and I get to a part and I don't really know what to do, so I might take out some materials and start cutting them up and making a collage, and having the story in mind, kind of take it into a new place. And often that can totally revitalize the story and take it to places that I never would have dreamed the story would go. It's not like something you can plan. And I would say, like my first novel, The Invisible Histories of the Spiral Mountain, at least 50% of that was influenced by the collages I was making. And many entire chapters were influenced by certain collages that I created during the time that I was making it. So I think it works really well with writing. I might be one of the few people that do that, but it definitely works for me. If you ever want to try it, I think you might be surprised at the results. Like I said, William Burroughs and Brian Geisen used it a lot. William Burroughs used the cut-up method with his Naked Lunch to shuffle the chapters around. There's many ways to use it, and I think all of them create the unexpected and can really influence your creative life. There are other things, but I think that's the gist of where my creativity comes from. So if you enjoy this, you can like and subscribe and all that stuff, and hit the bell if you want notifications. Anyway, have a good day. Take care. Bye.